Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. I'm glad to have the good fortune to be able to speak in the Dáil about LGBTQI and equality today. We do so, I think, from a really positive baseline in the Dáil today, in an Ireland that has evolved and developed, moving from intolerance and exclusion to something quite different, something moving towards real inclusion. There's a gentleman I particularly want to remember today, who's my husband's uncle, a man called Patrick Duggan. Patrick died earlier this year. He was an actor. He was Father Joe briefly in Father Ted, actually. He was in the Abbey and he was in the Gate and ultimately in London in EastEnders for many years. He left Ireland with his partner of over 60 years, Charles, to live in London for professional opportunity, obviously as an actor, but also it wasn't that easy to be here in Ireland as a gay man in the 1950s. And in London they had a better chance to live their own lives, to live as themselves, to live a life of love together until death parted them just weeks apart in March and April of this year. Patrick was so proud of his civil partnership and his relationship with Charles, but he was also so proud to see his country adopt civil partnership and then marriage equality. And in my experience, Patrick always looked forward with positivity rather than looking back at Ireland with any rancour. So happy Pride to Patrick and to Charles who have left us, but indeed happy Pride to all this weekend. Happy Pride to everyone who walks down the main streets of Dublin as themselves with their partners in expressions of love, in expressions of happiness. And I would wish that each of those people, and those who may yet choose to stay home, perhaps not ready to join, but might come in the future, I would wish that each of those people could comfortably enjoy that experience of natural, comfortable freedom each of the other 364 days of the year in our capital and around the rest of Ireland in the same way that I can without thinking about it at all. It is so important that Pride is going through the main streets of Dublin this year, that we can walk those streets with and as LGBTQI+ people and as allies fully accepted. Something really symbolic about the march going through the town, through our main streets, people holding hands, kissing their partner, being with their partner and being totally themselves for one day, recognising that there are many people in Ireland for who cannot be themselves so many other days because of how they present or how they feel they present or how they feel other people might feel they present. I certainly recognise that there are many people in Ireland today who on every other day may feel uncomfortable, that they may have to reduce who they are or how they present. People who feel they don't fit the norm, people who feel apprehensive for one reason or another about coming out and doing basic things like steeling themselves for the day out for a day's shopping, leaving the house, getting a bus, doing normal things because again of how society views them or how they feel society views them. Having to police somehow or somehow catch or arrest their natural manner for someone who doesn't fit the norm, it can really be a daily struggle. And I want to just name that experience in the Dáil today, and I certainly want to understand it. And I know the people whom I represent want to understand it, and they want to say clearly that we don't wish that that would be the case, that they want you, we want you, you who may feel that you don't fit, who are not out today, we want you in our world as you are, and together we'll be better for it. 1950s Dublin missed out on Patrick Duggan and others like him who left for something more than professional reasons, and I certainly hope we're not making that same mistake with other people today. The Minister rightly noted in his opening speech how deeply troubling it is that in a very short time, less I think even than 5 years alone, we have seen something about LGBTQI+ rights seem to go backwards across the world, and there seems to be considerable challenges in Ireland today. We know there have been reports, and many deputies have referenced it, of verbal and violent hate crimes on the community. And earlier this year, the community and indeed the country was rocked by the murders of two men in Sligo, Michael Snee, and of course Aidan Moffat, a Fine Gael stalwart, whose loss is still felt deeply within the Fine Gael community, as I know Michael Snee's loss is felt deeply within his community. And for all of those who loved and knew both men. Through the Justice Committee, we've been able to engage on the upcoming hate crime legislation. I look forward to that being published shortly. And indeed, the Taoiseach confirmed earlier today that the third strategy on domestic, sexual and gender-based violence is due to be published in the coming weeks, a body of work that will be gender neutral and deeply relevant, I think, to the LGBTQI+ community. And I have to say again, there is a really deep need for a modernised relationship and sexual education programme driven by the Department of Education that is inclusive of the LGBTQI+ community. I am so deeply aware that there are young children in Ireland today at different stages of their own personal awareness, at different stages of their own sexual awareness, who do not see themselves recognised in the programme of civic education that is there to help them learn more about the world. Not only that, but as Deputy Emer Higgins recognised, until last year I had found actively homophobic content on the curriculum programme, and the Department of Education must take urgent steps to make sure that there is nothing comparable there, and indeed that there is a proper inclusive programme of relationship and sexual education that allows every child in Ireland to see themselves being reflected and to see their family forms being reflected in the curriculum, and that is a matter of complete urgency. But it is a matter of deep respect, I think, to the LGBTQI plus community as well. We also need to see tangible and quick progress on the banning of conversion therapy. Last time I spoke on this in the Dáil, our closest EU neighbour, France, just days before, had banned conversion therapy. It is a commitment in our own programme for government. I look forward to speedy action upon publishing the research, which I believe is Q3 of this year. Particularly for transgender people, there really isn't appropriate healthcare in this country. I raised it in the Dáil in March in relation to Tavistock and youth trans healthcare, and in the coming weeks I'm due to meet with a clinician who provides specialist trans healthcare to discuss their views and experience. Of course, be feeding that back to the Minister of Health and Minister O'Gorman on any further correspondence. But I think, the last couple of weeks, I'm deeply aware that there have been particular concerns for discussions over the last 3 weeks or so, whether intended or not, to have a deeply damaging and difficult effect, particularly on trans people. And of course, I'm referring to the debate about that was facilitated on Liveline. I really do have concerns about homophobia in Ireland. We don't need it. It isn't where we've come from. We don't need to have homophobic attacks. We don't need to have homophobic language. And crucially, and I think this is what I reference with that debate, we don't need to fall into the trap of division, where we have journeyed positively and together for so long. The marriage equality referendum was, in my view, one of the greatest moments of this country's history, where people looked again at their families, at their assumptions, at their children, their brothers and sisters, and they chose to include. They chose to celebrate, they chose to listen and to learn and to open their hearts and their minds. Of course, that we needed a referendum at all was slightly problematic. How I should ever have been given the right to decide whom somebody else marries, any more than it's somebody else's business what my reproductive life might be, it was always a challenge for me. But look, obviously we did need to. There was a constitutional imperative that we did so. So we did it, and we did it marvellously, and we celebrated marvellously too. We were different and special, and we were an example to the world. And I genuinely believe we can stay that way. We don't have to go down the politics of division. In the referendum, we found ways through people naturals questions. We found ways to ask questions, we found ways to answer questions, openly and without embarrassment or fear of causing offence. There's something different about Ireland and our inclusion, something different to us than what has been going on in the UK, even though I see the same divisive talking points coming out in the Irish discourse as has been there for the last 2 years in the United Kingdom. We don't need to do that. There is something different about us and how we mind each other, something about how we respect questions and answers. We can find ways to provide answers and comfort to people who have never encountered the question of what it is to feel uncomfortable in gender, of what it is to feel different, of what it is to want to transition. We can find ways to answer questions about the practicalities of transition, about the practicalities of the natural questions that people may have about providing mental health supports and about recognising problems that are genuinely causing unspeakable pain, in particular to a very small number of our younger generation, but a very real number of our younger generation who need to talk and who need support. We are more accommodating and inclusive than the division that goes on elsewhere. We are not a Brexit UK. We are not a Trumpian United States. We are different. And I just don't buy into a them versus us narrative on anything. It feeds the polarisation, and we need to find ways to have a conversation that is important, but that are in ways that are more accommodating. We've had the Gender Recognition Act here since I think it was 2014, commenced in 2015, and we haven't had major issues since then. So where is this coming from now? Where is this division coming from now? I could see it clearly 2 years ago coming from the United Kingdom. I referenced it here back in February, March, that I hoped we wouldn't go down this. The Women's Council has been alive to this. The Women's Council has been actively working with TENI, LGBT Ireland and others to try to identify this issue and get ahead of it. Because it is, while there are so many people with natural questions, there is also something else going on with this debate. I have been in the United Kingdom and been approached by members of that debate in the United Kingdom, looking for me to try to advance their position here. I'm happy to speak to anybody, I'm happy to listen to anybody, but not in a way where it's going down a road of excluding people. Ireland dealt with the same-sex marriage referendum question in a way that allowed people to learn and grow together. And I think that's what the LGBTQI community needs at the moment, to be able to engage, to be able to have other people engage respectfully and to answer the questions that people may have. Trans rights, women's rights, men's rights, they're not competing rights. It's my opinion, and it's an opinion that's shared by the many, many people who have contacted me these past few weeks. It doesn't impact my pre-existing rights to acknowledge that other people have rights too, and that they need to have them articulated and protected. I'm coming up 2 years since taking the role as Fine Gael spokesperson for equality, and on this particular topic it's been such an enlightening 2 years, although I was deeply engaged already. I've had the pleasure of meeting and speaking with truly amazing and brave people who have come from difficult, often unaccepting backgrounds, who have gone through the personal turmoil of coming to terms with their own identity or sexuality, young people in particular through COVID who hadn't come out, who couldn't get out, who were stuck at home either in situations where they weren't respected or they didn't feel included or they couldn't come out and talk to their family. Belong To in particular played an enormously supportive and important role during that period, providing people with the opportunity to connect with mental health professionals, providing counselling, providing mentorship, providing support. It was a particularly difficult period for young teenagers who hadn't come out to their families or who were in difficulties, and that has just I just want to mention that because I think there are long-term effects for those people about how they feel society may view them. But I've had the pleasure of engaging with advocacy groups such as LGBT Ireland, TENI, Belong To, and I really want to thank them for their ongoing engagement with me, and indeed to the Women's Council, who have been such a powerful ally on these issues, and who have been, I think, such a powerful ally in explaining over the last number of weeks that being a woman and accommodating trans rights are not competing ideas at all. We get to choose our discourse, we can choose how we progress, and I think we're in a really positive and powerful position. We can maintain that, and I hope we do. Achieving full equality is an ongoing, everyday matter of education, of acceptance and understanding, and I look forward to continuing to play my part as an ally and a legislator in this. Happy Pride.